Well, today's piece I got an auction for a grand total of $66.85. Is it worth it? Probably not. When I got it home, I found out there is no maker's mark. Now it is a solid little piece, lots of wood components. I need to look at it a little bit more closely, but it's a really solid piece. It's from a really nice consignment store here in the area, and occasionally they'll do online auctions, so that's how I got it. I don't love the hardware. I know a lot of people like the bat wings, but I'm not a big fan of them. So I'm not sure what I'm gonna do. If I'm gonna paint it, if I'm going to stain it, strip it. Because it doesn't have a maker's mark, that means that I just really honestly can't get as much of a return on my investment. So I'm not gonna go all out and probably strip the whole thing and do a whole lot of work to it because I just can't justify it with the resale value of it. So I'm gonna make it really pretty, but I think it'll be a good flip. So let's go.
So here it is. I do have the drawers out of order, but it's a solid little piece. You can tell it's a full wood top. I really think that it's solid wood as far as the top goes. And then the drawers are, I don't know if they're solid wood or veneer. I haven't looked at it as closely yet. There's a little bit of scratches on the top. I think, nobody wanted it. I was literally the only bid. So I'm just going to take the opportunity to do something fun with it. I just think a lot of people don't like this design because it's just kind of across as really outdated. And so I think the base and the batwing hardware, I think is what some people don't like about it. So, but you can see the back, I think it's just a solid piece of wood. So I'm just going to start by taking all of the hardware off and we'll give it a good clean. I decided I'm going to work on the base first. So I'm going to unscrew every screw that I see, and then I'm just going to knock it with my hammer and get it off. Then I'll take a trip to Lowe's and get my new lumber that I need. I'm going to be using a 1x3 for the apron, and then I'll use a 2x2 for the legs. In the meantime, I'll prep the drawers. I'm going to sand them with 180, just a nice little soft scuff sand. Then I'll clean all the details with some liquid sandpaper, just to make sure that the surface is etched up and really ready. Now I'm going to fill in some of the hardware holes. I'm using some dowels. You can buy dowels that are already pre-cut, but these are just ones that I had, and so I'm cutting them with some miter shears. I'll put a little painter's tape on the underneath side. They didn't have the exact dowels that fit these holes, or they're a little bit bigger. And so I'm going to put a little bit of Bondo in the hole and then around it, and that will really ground it in. You can use Bondo to do the entire thing, but I just feel like it gives me a better feel if I have some real wood component in there. So that's why I like to do the dowel rods in the holes. Now I'm ready to tackle the base. I had some areas on the sides that were still there once I took the base off. So I put a piece of tape there so that it would cut cleanly, and then I'm going to use my circular saw to cut off as much as I can, and then I'll use my multi-tool to get the rest of it.
So since this piece has no maker's mark, It's a great little piece, but I'm gonna use it as a opportunity to experiment. So I took off the base and I chopped down the sides with my circular saw and my multi-tool. Is it the exact way you probably should do it? I don't know. We're winging it over here. I don't have like a workshop. I just bought my first miter saw the end of last year. So we're learning. You can learn with me. But I'm gonna try a base. I've done it one other time, very simple. I did very simple legs, but I was thinking about trying an angled base this time. So why not? Let's try it.
I'm going to start by cutting the legs first. I'm going to do a 10-degree angle. Now this is inspired by Flipped by Abby. She had a YouTube video on it. She was inspired by DIY Wife, so you can go check both of them out on YouTube. I'm going to try the angled base that Abby used. For the legs, I'm going to do a parallelogram. So I'm going to do that 10 degrees on the top and on the bottom, and then I'm going to do a slight taper on the inside of the leg just to give it a little bit more dimension. So you see there's my 10-degree angle. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that slight taper on the inside. So I'm going to make a mark on my miter saw. I'm just eyeballing this. I don't have an exact measurement, but I'm going to draw a line, and since I want the taper on the inside, I'm going to flip it upside down, put it on my line, and then make my cut for the taper. Now I need to decide how tall I want my legs. So I checked my old base, it was about 6 inches, and then I tried to kind of look at the new area, how high I wanted it. So I settled on 7 inches. I transferred those measurements to my leg, and then I made my cut, again, going with that 10-degree angle. And there's my first leg. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the other leg. Again, I start with my 10-degree angle. I'm going to do the base. Then I'll set it back at 0 degrees to do my tapered cut. You'll see I have to kind of set it up and try to decide what angle I want, because this one is going to be on the right-hand side. So you have to just kind of look at your angles and make sure you don't get confused. I used the other leg to mark where I wanted to cut the length. And I started to cut it, and the angle, it was not right. It was at 10 degrees, but it just wasn't right. Well, what I realized later is that I actually cut the second leg from the right side of the fence, and so my angle was a little different. So I had to move my miter saw over another 10 degrees, and that gave me the angle that I was looking for. So there's my 2 legs. Now I'm ready for the apron. So I cut one side to the 10-degree angle. Then I'm going to measure how wide I want it. I decided to go about 7 inches in on each side. I'm trying to kind of line it up with the middle of the top drawer. It was kind of my thought process of where I thought it would look good. So I could have put it a little bit farther out to the side, but I didn't want them to go over the edge. But I like it. I think it's going to end up working out. Again, the apron is more like a trapezoid, so I have both angles on each side are at 10 degrees. For the back legs, I'm not doing any kind of angles. I'm just going to do straight cuts because nobody really sees the back. And so I'm not going to angle those, those will just be straight. I double check that all of my legs are the same length so I don't have any wobbling. I'm going to set all the pieces out, and then I can get my measurements for the side pieces that will connect to the legs. And those are also just going to be straight cuts. There's no angles on those. So now that I have those cut, you can see it's kind of coming together. I'm going to use the Craig pocket hole jig. I use their little tool here to measure how wide my board is, which is 3/4 of an inch. So then I'm going to adjust the collar on the drill bit to the same measurement. And then on the piece itself, you also need to adjust that to 3/4 as well. And then once you measure your wood, they have a nice little handy area that tells you, okay, if your width is this, then your center line is going to be A, B, or C, and they show you which holes to use. So you just have to make sure everything's lined up correct. Then I'll use that drill and just drill down into the holes that they recommend. Then I'm going to drill my holes that are going to go down into the actual dresser. You can clamp this up to make it really perfect, but because of the angles, it was really hard for me to try to clamp it. So I just did my pilot holes, and then I screwed it together with the 1 1/4 inch screws that come with the Craig system. And thankfully it worked really well. And then I could start adhering it to the dresser itself. Here's the moment of truth. We'll tip it up and see if it's level, and give a little shake, and it is. Yay! Now I'm going to start working on the top, but I'm going to tape off the base first just to make sure I don't get anything on that when I go to paint the body or when I strip the top. I'm using Smart Strip by Dumond. I'm going to strip this top. This is a really, really thick finish. So I left it for a while, but I ended up using my carbide scraper to scrape most of it off. And then I'll come back with some steel wool and acetone to get the remainder of it off. Now I'll go through my sanding process. I like to use my Festool at 80 grit to really get a good sand. And then after that, I'll hand sand the rest. So I'll come back with 80 grit just to get any additional finish off and to get rid of any sanding swirls. And then I'll move up to 120 and finish off at 180. I'll give it a clean with a 50-50 mixture of denatured alcohol and water. I'm looking for any additional sanding swirls or any spots that I feel like need an additional sand. This is the time I want to do that. Then I'll type out the top so I can start working on the body. I'm priming with Ben Shellac primer because I am going to go lighter, so I want to make sure I get a really good prime on this. And so I'm using Ben Shellac for the first coat, and then I'll use Ben 123 water base for the second coat. Before I do my second coat of primer, I will go ahead and drill my hardware holes. So for this, I'm just going to use my laser level and I'm trying to find the center, and then I will drill my holes. Now I'll do my second coat of primer, make sure everything is covered, then I'll give it another scuff sand and move on to paint. I'm using the color a new gray. Now it says gray in the title, but actually it's like a warm putty color. I'm going to water it down a little bit. This is Sherwin-Williams. It's their Emerald Urethane Trim Enamel line, and it's a really beautiful paint. It does not need a top coat. I like to use it especially if I'm just painting the body. I'm using my Erlex 5700. This is a turbine system. It's a 2-turbine. Gives a beautiful finish. This is by Wagner, and it's a very affordable paint gun, and it gives you just a gorgeous finish. I like to overlap my passes by about 50%. I'll let it dry. This one has a dry time of about 4 hours. Give it a light scuff sand, and then do a second coat. after my second coat, then I'll work on the drawers. I'll get the acetone out and clean up any additional overspray, and this will be a great time. I also do any touch-ups that I see that need to be done as well. So for the base, I'm going to do a tan wash in Algonquin by Fusion Mineral Paint. I'm going to do a 1:8 ratio on my paint wash. You can see I'm putting it in a plate and it's obviously too much, but I need to be able to get my really big brush in there, and I didn't have anything at the time that worked, but I found an old pitcher, and so I'm just going to put my paint wash in the pitcher, and that will help me to be able to get my big brush in there, because I really like to use this particular brush when I'm doing paint washing. So my technique with paint washing is I dilute it quite a bit. So usually either 1:8 or 1:10. I'm just simply going to brush it on, and I'm going to leave it, and I'm going to let the water evaporate. I'm not going to wipe it back, and it's a really beautiful technique with paint washing. I used to wipe it off, but I felt like it could get really streaky. And this is one of those trust the process, because at first you're like, oh, this is not going to look good. But I tell you what, when that water evaporates, it's beautiful. So you might try it if you haven't done this particular technique with paint washing yet. But the key is make sure that you're kind of using a rag to get off any excess so that it doesn't pool. Now for the top, it is cherry wood. So I'm going to start with a green wash to try to cancel some of those red undertones. Again, I'm using a 1:8 ratio, but this time I am going to wipe it back because I don't want it settling into the grains. And I'm also going to give it a scuff sand with 220. I'm closing the grain a little bit more because, again, cherry is notorious for being patchy when you try to stain it or paint wash it. So I'm going to close that grain a little bit. I'll do the green wash, wipe it right back because, again, I don't want it settling in the grain. And then I'll come back with a tan wash and see how that looks. So you see with the tan wash, I'm just going back and forth with my paintbrush. I will dab it off on my microfiber rag. I'm just making sure I get all those areas, and I'm just kind of smoothing it out, but I'm not wiping it off. Now I'm ready to attach all of my hardware. I went with antique brass this particular time, and these are beautiful, very high quality pulls that I got. And then I'm going to recondition all of the drawers with natural Danish oil. So after the tan wash, I came out and there was a part on the right that just didn't quite take it. So I decided to do a second coat of the tan wash. Again, just kind of feathering it out, trying to blend it into the surrounding wood. But once it dried, it was still there a little bit. So I decided to grab some shellac, spray that in case there was some kind of contaminant that was not letting that paint adhere. So I did a coat of that. And then once that dried, it was much better. I am going to go over this with a glaze, so I'm not super concerned with it being perfect. I just need it to be a little bit closer to the surrounding wood. Once I was dry, I felt like it was pulling a little gray in real life, and so I felt it needed to be warmed up to have some contrast. So I'm applying General Finishes, their Glaze Effects in Van Dyke Brown. It's very easy to apply. You just wipe it on and you wipe off the excess. So I felt it kind of gave a little bit more depth to the top, and I'm going to do the same on the base. Should I have applied the base color before I adhered it? Yes, but I did it. So I just used an artist brush along the top and all the little areas, and then I was able to easily get it. And I feel it's not a perfect match because this is poplar, the top is cherry, but I feel it blends really well. Well, let's look back at the before. This is a cute little dresser. Obviously, nobody wanted it. I was the only one. So I felt, you know what, it's an opportunity to try something new. Obviously, at least in my area, nobody wanted it in its current state. So the obvious part was let's change out the hardware and maybe try to either simplify that base or completely change the base. And so, it was really fun to try something new. So after all of that work, stripping that top, doing the tan wash, changing hardware, doing the base, here is the finished product. What do you think? Turned out pretty good. Obviously, I like the simplified hardware, by just filling in some of those holes and not having so many pieces and pulls. I like the knobs with the drawer cup type of pulls. The top turned out beautiful. I actually like the tone. And let's talk about that base. What did you think? Did you like it? I did. I mean, I wish I had a router, which is something I'm trying to get this year. And I think that if I had done like a round over bit on the base, I think it could have just kind of taken it next level. But I think it turned out really good for my first time. So here's a close-up of the hardware. It's really beautiful. I think it goes really well with the tone of the wood, with it being the brass. Antique brass instead of the brush brass. Just kind of gives it an antique-y feel. So I actually haven't sealed the top yet. It wasn't dry for me. Needed to finish the video, but I will come back with the Minwax polyacrylic. This is a crystal clear, and I'll make sure I get several coats on there, and it'll darken it just a hair probably. Not much because the flat really doesn't change it very much, and this one's that crystal clear, so it'll be a beautiful sheen. So tell me what you think about this project. Did you like it? It's a little bit different than the ones that I normally do, but I feel like this is a true upcycle. So tell me what you think, and thanks for watching.